Beeping was the only sound I remember. Not my son's voice, not my daughter-in-law's, just the steady, indifferent rhythm of a monitor telling the room I was still alive, even if no one who loved me was there to hear it. I had been at my church's Wednesday evening potluck. St. Mart, Andrews United, the same brick building on Elgin Street where I'd been going since 1987. I brought my butter tart squares, the ones with the walnuts on top that Pastor Glenn always asked for by name. I set them on the table by the door, turned to say hello to Marion from the choir, and then the floor came up to meet me. That's all I have, floor, then ceiling, then beeping. The paramedics told me later that 2 women from the congregation had held my hand the entire ride to Ottawa General. Women I knew from the Tuesday morning Bible study. Not family, just kind people who happened to be there. My son was called at 7:14 in the evening. The hospital's records showed it clearly, 7:14. The attending nurse tried his cell phone 4 times. Then she tried the home number he'd listed as my emergency contact. Then she tried his cell again. 11 calls in total before she moved on to other options. He didn't answer any of them. I didn't know this yet, of course. I was unconscious for most of it. What I knew when I finally opened my eyes Thursday morning was that the face looking down at me belonged to a nurse named Sandra, not to my son, and that my mouth tasted like copper and something chemical, and that my left side felt like it had been filled with wet sand. "Good morning," she said, and her voice was careful in the way that told me things were serious. It was a mild stroke, they explained. Caught in time, the right side of my brain. I would have weakness on my left side for a while, some difficulty with words when I was tired, but with physiotherapy and time, the prognosis was good. I was 67 years old and otherwise healthy. I had every reason to recover fully. What I did not have, apparently, was a son who picked up his phone. He called on Friday afternoon. Not Thursday, Friday. More than 36 hours after I'd been admitted. More than 36 hours after the hospital had left message on his voicemail. He called Friday afternoon, and when the nurse handed me the phone, his first words were, "Mom, I just saw the missed calls." I had my phone on silent. We were up at the cottage. The cottage. His father-in-law's place on Calabogie Lake. 3 hours from Ottawa. 3 hours. Not 30, but he had kept his phone on silent for more than a day and a half because they were, and I remember this word exactly, unwinding. I didn't say much. I was still tired in a way. I had never been tired before. A heaviness that started behind my eyes and went all the way down. I said I was okay. I said the doctors were pleased. I said we'd talk when I was feeling stronger. He said, "Okay, good. That's a relief. We'll probably head back Sunday. Sunday. No, I'll come right now. Not, we're packing the car this minute. Sunday. 2 more days, because the cottage was booked through the weekend and his wife had been looking forward to the kayaking." I handed the phone back to the nurse and looked out the window at the grey October sky, and I thought, this is who he is. This is who he has always been, and I have been choosing not to see it clearly. My son is 41. His name doesn't matter as much as what he did, so let me call him what he is in this story, my son. He married a woman 11 years ago who had very particular ideas about what his life should look like. And somewhere in those 11 years, I became an inconvenience in the picture she was building. I am not a dramatic woman. I did not make scenes at holidays or insert myself where I wasn't wanted. I brought casseroles when they were busy. I babysat their dog, a nervous little terrier, when they went to Mexico the February before last. I sent birthday cards with checks inside, and I never asked to be thanked. But I also, slowly and then all at once, became someone they scheduled rather than someone they called. Someone who appeared on the calendar the way a dentist appointment appears. Necessary, perhaps, but not exactly welcome. His wife made that clear in small ways. The Christmases that suddenly needed to be split between 4 families instead of 2. The dinners I was invited to and then told the day before. had been changed to just us. The way she referred to my house, on the one occasion I heard her do it, as that drive. That drive, 40 minutes on the 416. I had driven it 100 times in the other direction. But again, I am not dramatic. I adjusted. I told myself this was normal, that families stretched and changed, that I should be grateful for what I had. I still talked to my son every week or two. I still believed, in the soft, stubborn way that mothers believe things, that at the bottom of everything, he would show up when it mattered. Calabogie, October, 11 missed calls. I had my answer. The person who did show up was my neighbour's daughter. Her name is Willa, and she's 28, and she lives 3 houses down with her mother, who is one of my oldest friends. Willa found out what had happened because her mother had seen the ambulance from her kitchen window Wednesday night and had called the hospital the next morning to ask. And Willa, without being asked, without making it a production, simply arrived at my room Thursday afternoon with a paper bag from the Thai place on Bank Street that she knew I liked, and a phone charger because she'd guessed mine was at home, and a library book because she thought I might want something quiet to read. She sat with me for 2 hours. She asked the nurse questions I hadn't thought to ask. She wrote down the answers in a small notebook and left it on my bedside table. She came back Friday and Saturday. Her mother came on Sunday. My son and his wife arrived on Sunday afternoon as well, about an hour after his mother-in-law. They stood in the doorway of my room with the stiff, slightly pained expressions of people who are doing something they feel they should do, rather than something they want to. His wife was wearing a cream-colored coat that looked like it had just come off a rack. My son kissed my forehead and said I looked good, which was generous since I had been in hospital for 4 days and my hair was a situation. They stayed 40 minutes. His wife checked her phone twice. Willa's mother stayed 3 hours and brought me a proper nightgown from home because hospital gowns, she said, were designed by someone who had never been cold in their life. I went home the following Tuesday with a cane, a bag of prescriptions, and a referral to a physiotherapist on Merivale Road. The hospital social worker had arranged for a home care aide to come 3 mornings a week. Well, I regained my strength. It was a kind system, all things considered. The aide was a Haitian woman, named something long and beautiful, that I immediately asked her to shorten, and she laughed and said everyone called her Cece. And Cece became one of the steadiest presences of the next 2 months. My son called on Thursdays usually, brief calls. He asked how physio was going. He said they'd try to get over soon. He said his wife sent her best, which I knew was not strictly true, but appreciated the effort of saying. November turned into December, and I was moving better. My words came more easily. I was driving again by the 3rd week of November, short trips, just to the grocery store and back, but still, the independence mattered to me. I had been independent for a long time since my husband passed in 1919, and the thought of losing that had frightened me more than the stroke itself. I had, in the time since my husband died, been careful with money. He had left me in a reasonable position. We had paid off the house on Barbary Crescent years before, and with his pension and my own teacher's retirement, I was comfortable. Not wealthy, but secure. I had, over those years, accumulated some savings as well. A GIC that had matured in September, some investments my husband's brother had helped me set up. Altogether, somewhere around $90,000 sitting in my accounts, plus the house. I had, before the stroke, been meaning to update my will. After the stroke, I made an appointment. My lawyer is a calm, no-nonsense woman named Elspeth, who has been handling my family's papers since my husband was alive. I sat in her office on a grey December morning, and I told her what had happened. Not dramatically, just the facts. The 11 calls, the cottage, the 40 minutes, the cream coat. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, "What would you like to do?" I had thought about this for weeks. I had lain awake thinking about it in the particular way you think about things at 2 in the morning when the house is quiet and you're too tired to pretend you don't know the truth. I thought about who had sat with me, who had brought me Thai food and a phone charger and a library book, who had stayed 3 hours and brought me a proper nightgown, who had taken my cane and driven me to my first physio appointment because I wasn't ready to drive yet, even though she never made me feel like it was any trouble at all. I want to leave the house and the majority of the estate to Willa and her mother equally, I said. I want to leave my son $10,000 and a letter. Elspeth wrote it down without blinking. The letter, she said. Would you like help drafting it, or would you write it yourself? I'll write it myself, I said. I think I'd been wanting to write it for a while. I did write it. I wrote it over 3 evenings in January, at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, the way I used to mark essays after supper when I was still teaching. I didn't write it angry. Anger is exhausting, and I had been tired enough. I wrote it honest. I told him about the 11 calls. I told him I understood he hadn't intended to hurt me, that I believed that genuinely, that I did not think he was a cruel person. I told him I thought he had built a life that had room for very little beyond his own immediate comfort, and that this was a choice adults were allowed to make, but that choices had consequences that ran in both directions. I told him I loved him. That part was also true. I sealed the letter and gave it to Elspeth to keep with the documents. In February, my son called on a Thursday as usual. The call was a little longer than normal, 20 minutes maybe, and at the end he mentioned, with a careful casualness that I recognized immediately, that they'd been thinking about making some renovations. The kitchen, probably, and maybe the basement. His wife had been looking at quotes, and things were more expensive than they'd expected. He did not ask me directly. He didn't need to. The shape of the conversation was clear enough. I said, that sounds like a big project. He said, yeah, we're figuring out the financing. I said, I hope it goes well. There was a pause. He said, Mum, you know, if you ever wanted to help out, even just a loan, we'd obviously pay it back. I said, I don't think that's something I'm able to do right now. Another pause, longer. He said, oh, okay. We talked for another 3 minutes about the weather and a show he'd been watching, and then we said goodbye, and I hung up, and I sat for a moment with the phone in my hand, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not peace, exactly. Not satisfaction. Something quieter than either of those. Something like the feeling when you finally said the honest thing, and there's nothing left to brace against. He called again 2 weeks later. This time he mentioned that his wife's mother had suggested they might be eligible for some kind of bridging loan, but the rates were high, and he was just wondering what my situation looked like these days, just in general, no pressure. I said my situation was fine, and that I was managing well. He said, That's great, Mom, that's great. I said I should let you go, I'm heading out. I was not heading out. I was sitting in my living room with Cece, who had finished her official home care weeks ago, but still came by on Fridays because we had started playing cribbage, and she was fiercely competitive about it. I looked at Cece after I hung up, and she looked back at me with the expression of a woman who has seen many things and is not easily surprised. Renovation, she said. Renovation, I said. She dealt the cards. Spring came slowly that year, the way it does in Ottawa, still snow in March, mud in April, the lilacs on the side of my house, finally opening in the 3rd week of May. I went to physio twice a week now, down from 3, and the therapist said she was proud of my progress. I had returned to the Tuesday morning Bible study. I had started walking the neighbourhood again in the evenings, just 20 minutes at first, then 30, then a full loop around the park. Willa joined me sometimes. We walked and talked about nothing important. Her work, a book she was reading, a family of ducks that had taken up residence in the retention pond by the park entrance. She never brought up my son unless I did. She had very good instincts about the difference between presence and pressure. One evening in April, she mentioned that she and her boyfriend were thinking about buying a place of their own, that the market was brutal, but they were saving, that it might be a few years yet. I didn't say anything then, but I thought about it. In May, I called Elspeth and made a small amendment to the documents. Nothing structural, just a letter of wishes attached alongside the will, the kind that isn't legally binding but lets the executor know your intentions for specific items. In it, I mentioned that if Willa was in a position to use the money toward a home, that would make me genuinely glad. I slept better the night after I made that call than I had in years. I am not a vindictive person. I want to say that clearly because I know how this story can sound from the outside, and I know what words people reach for when a mother changes her will after a crisis. But I didn't change it to punish anyone. I changed it to tell the truth. A will is the last honest thing you do, and I wanted mine to say something true, that love is not a blood type, that it is not inherited or automatic, that it is a practice, a showing up, a being present in the ordinary moments and the terrifying ones equally, that the people who held my hand in the ambulance and brought me Thai food and stayed 3 hours and dealt cribbage cards and walked with me in the evenings when my left leg was still uncertain, those people were my family. My son is a good man in many ordinary ways. I believe that. I hope he finds his way to a version of himself that is more present, more available, less arranged around comfort. I hope his wife softens with time. I hope the kitchen renovation comes in under budget. And I hope, on some future Thursday, he calls and asks how I am and means it all the way down, without any other question hiding underneath. If he does, I'll answer. I have never been the kind of woman who doesn't pick up the phone.